Hi everyone, Drecky here, and today we're looking at something special. When I was a kid, I was jealous of all my friends with their little tiny portable dictionaries and translators. I thought those devices with their small dot matrix LCD screens would be the coolest thing ever to have, if only they could run full Windows. I drew sketches of what would be my perfect device in MS Paint, and obsessed over tiny little details like the keyboard, the ports, and then as I got older, I kind of completely forgot about that. PDAs and smartphones more or less filled the need that I had for a tiny pocket-sized computer. And then a few years ago, a company called GPD released a little device called the GPD Win, which reignited that desire, except for at the time I still had one more requirement. I wanted to be able to use a tablet pen with my tiny laptop. Then one day, while browsing the darkest corners of AliExpress, I saw this laptop and I knew I had to have it. This is the One Netbook Yoga 2S, and despite enjoying my experience with it so far, there are some immediate issues that need to be worked out, so let's get those out of the way. The first issue, and probably the worst thing about this device, are the speakers. For a portable media consumption device, the speakers on this thing absolutely suck. They are located under the keyboard and sound more like a 2010 smartphone than a laptop. They're fuzzy and quiet and have no bass to them whatsoever. The second issue is with the keyboard. It's a little bit mushy, not backlit, and the layout could be better. Third, the screen has some pretty major backlight bleed and makes it look like a cheap LCD panel. And finally, the last major problem is that there are some thermal issues under load. But if these things are not a big issue for you, this little laptop is pretty damn cool and capable of some neat things. It runs full Photoshop, video editing software, and can even do some light gaming because yeah, it has a full power processor, 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of SSD storage, and it runs Windows 10. So check it out, that's Skyrim running on it. Do you remember back when that was an important benchmark? Let's start with an in-depth look at the build quality and design of the laptop. The build quality is a mixture of excellent and slightly less than excellent. The all-metal body is solid and it feels substantial in the hands. It's actually quite heavy despite the size. The edges of the laptop are a bit too sharp and the hinge is a little bit too tight. I don't think it's going to wear out anytime soon. Even 3 or 4 years ago, this all-metal build would have been considered excellent, but there are a few things that make it not so great. First of all, out of the box there were a couple scuffs on the metal that made it look, well, unfinished. The second thing that really bothered me is when the hinge closes there's a loud click of metal on glass. I'm worried that the glass will crack as a result because the hinge closes so tightly, and so I put some little rubber sticky bits on the corners to cushion the screen. I also sent a suggestion to One Netbook that they do something similar out of the box. My Lenovo, for example, has a thin rubber line around the screen that cushions it against its metal frame. A penny worth of rubber stickers and this issue would be easily solved. Less warranty repairs, less cracked screens, better for everyone overall. There were a few other missed opportunities with the design as well. The screen could have been extended larger instead of these crazy huge side bezels, or they could have even stuck the speakers up here, or a webcam, or just something. One opportunity that this laptop did not miss was with port selection. The port selection on this thing is almost better than some of the modern MacBooks. While an additional full-size USB port would have been appreciated, I do like that it has a micro HDMI out and a headphone jack. The USB-C port can do display out as well as support other dongles, but most of the time you're going to be using it to charge the device. The computer is a little bit picky about the type of charger it uses, only supporting USB-C with power delivery, and even then only some chargers that I tested it with worked. I also noticed that Wi-Fi signal tends to be a little bit weaker than other devices I own. I suspect that the antenna is stuck under the keyboard just like the speakers, so the Wi-Fi is a little bit more distance limited. When in Wi-Fi range, however, speed is excellent, easily maxing out my 250 megabit per second connection. Moving up to the display, this tiny 7-inch 1080p display on the laptop is sharp, fairly color accurate, but only moderately bright. It's nowhere near as bright as a modern smartphone, but it is enough that you'll be able to work outside, so long as you're not in direct sunlight. When it's put beside my full-size laptop, they're both around the same brightness, which puts it at approximately 300 nits. Unfortunately, it does use pulse width modulation to dim the backlight, which means subtle flickering. You will not see that flickering in person, but it's definitely visible here on camera. My biggest gripe with the display though, it's not the pulse width modulation, not the limited brightness, but it's the backlight bleed. The left edge of my screen is noticeably brighter than the rest of the display, and on a dark screen there's other uniformity issues as well. This feels like the kind of IPS screen I'd find in a $100 tablet rather than a premium niche device, and that is a shame because the screen is one of those things you'll be staring at the most. Thankfully, despite the screen being tiny, the touch and pen input is pretty accurate. The pen input is from a company called Goodix, who makes the pen displays for Huion and other Wacom clones. The pen experience too is decent, but it's not overall that great. For writing notes and other basic inputs, you'll be more than fine, but the pressure curve is just too tight for drawing and sketching. What I mean by that is it's too easy to go from a light brush stroke to full pressure, and as a result, you don't get to experience the full 2048 levels. It just means that things will perform best when accuracy is not super important. So for example, dodging and burning parts of a picture, or touching up blemishes, or even rough digital painting, that's great. But hard comic line art can be tough to get right. I'll do an in-depth look at the pen and drawing in a later video since I could spend 15 or 20 minutes doing demonstrations and talking about it right now. Just if you're an artist, keep in mind that this device may not be for you, unless it gets a driver update to fix the pressure curve. Performance is where this thing hits a home run, well, at least relatively so. Featuring a dual-core M3 8100Y processor, this mini laptop has similar specification to an entry-level Surface tablet. That means day-to-day tasks are handled with relative ease. Everything from Netflix to word processing, even browsing the web while listening to Spotify, it's snappy and fast. At no time did I notice slowdowns or stuttering or lag, even as I got into more intense stuff like unzipping files while installing things. All of that was quick. The fan powers up and gets pretty damn loud, but it keeps things zipping along like it was meant to be. The one place where performance does flop, however, is on the SD card reader. Whatever specification they are using for this card reader does not take advantage of high-speed memory cards, meaning my SD cards are maxed out at about 20 write and 30 read. The read and write speeds I was getting are fast enough for watching movies or running basic apps off the SD card, but even a cheap USB 3.0 card reader will do better than that, and that's highly disappointing. Typing on this tiny keyboard also isn't too bad. It does take a little while to get used to how much smaller it is, and some of the button layout decisions are a little strange to say the least. However, after a couple days of practice, I can consistently ace typing tests at around 60 words per minute. My usual is somewhere in 80 to 90. Honestly though, the feel of the keyboard is just a little bit too mushy and heavy for my tastes. I wish the keys were a little bit more springy and responsive. I don't hate it, but I am very aware after using a Surface Pro keyboard and my laptop keyboard that it is possible to have a significantly better feeling keyboard with such a limited travel. Again, like the display, this is one of those things where it's passable, but it could be so much better, and it would speak loads to the quality of the device if they had a higher quality keyboard. Most of the extra time I think was hunting for symbol buttons or misclicking on the tiny comma, period, slash button. I wish those three buttons were full-sized and the semicolon slash buttons were the smaller ones, but people who code often may disagree with me. Since the majority of my typing are emails, creative writing, and scripting for my YouTube channel, I use the period and comma a lot more, which would make a full-size button for them a necessity. Like I said, some odd decisions on this keyboard could have been changed around, but you will get used to it. This little laptop has a tiny optical nub instead of a touchpad. This is not like the ThinkPad nubs, it actually uses an optical view to see where your finger's going. You don't push it up and down and the mouse goes around, instead you run your finger over it like you would with a touchpad. I was skeptical at first, but after a small adjustment period it's really not that bad to use. This is kind of a common theme throughout the laptop where things are good but not excellent, or they just take some getting used to. Using a mix of the optical nub and a touchscreen, it almost feels natural to navigate through this device. Well, almost. It's not going to replace a proper touchpad, but it does suffice and can even be pretty accurate. It's better than the touchpad on my old HP and, well, that's all I really require. That thing sucked. As I mentioned earlier when discussing performance, the fan can rev up pretty high, and that kind of relates to the largest concern I have with this laptop: temperature management. While I was running benchmarks in order to do the video, I noticed that the SSD temperature monitor would spike. I think that this monitor must be incorrect or reading for some other component because it was going insanely high for an SSD. Like, an ordinary SSD would run probably around 40 or 50 degrees Celsius, whereas this thing here was spiking anywhere from 50 up to 70 and back, so I think that there must be an issue. The manufacturer says that the SSD should max out at 70 Celsius, and honestly, an SSD doesn't have enough wattage to get anywhere close to that, so this reading must be wrong. It maybe is a processor or something else, that would make sense, but not the SSD. In terms of battery life, one mix states something like 12 hours, but that is just crazy. The only time I got anywhere near 12 hours of the battery was with the screen brightness low and writing this document. I think they must have deliberately tested this laptop in a use case like this, so they could say the longest battery life possible without outright lying. However, I expect actual battery life under ordinary usage to be closer to 4 to 6 hours. So if you're streaming video or gaming or anything that requires heavy lifting, expect less, maybe 2 to 3. As I mentioned at the start of this review, the speakers are probably my least favorite thing about this device. So much potential is lost here. This would be a way better media consumption device if you could hear what you're doing. The speakers are not front firing, they're not downwards firing, there isn't even a speaker grill. They just kind of fire up into the keyboard. That's a huge issue because sound just kind of floats lifelessly up through the keyboard, and if you turn the volume up too high, the sound gets fuzzy thanks to something in the laptop vibrating. The speakers will get you by in a pinch, especially with the volume under 15%, but even a modern, cheap cell phone speaker is better quality, and those things are fit into a much smaller space, so One Netbook really has no excuse and needs to fix this for its next revision. A final note, no quadruple A battery is included with the pen, so make sure to add one to your purchase if you want to use the pen right away. Quadruple A batteries are uncommon and extremely expensive as singles, so get one from China where they're much cheaper. My job as a reviewer is to point out what I like and do not like about a device, and then it's up to you, the viewer, to ask the question, can I live with the issues? Will I get enough out of this device that I can put up with its problems? No laptop is going to be perfect, and the One Netbook is definitely not the exception. It comes from a company who is relatively new to making computers, and their inexperience shows in a couple of places. For example, the lack of padding on the screen. I wish that they had decided to go with a better panel for the display, and that they had positioned the speakers somewhere better, but here's the thing. Currently, this is one of the only pocket-sized 2-in-1 laptops with pen input. Yeah, it is expensive for what you're getting, some of the hardware choices are questionable, but at the same time, it's cool as hell and a bragging right to own it. Our support as tech enthusiasts helps these niche companies grow. Maybe they'll watch my video and get some suggestions for how to build the next one better, or maybe they'll become more popular of a brand like GPD and then be able to put better components in, or maybe in 6 months they'll entirely disappear and anyone who purchased these will be left in the dark. Either way, I love that there are niche companies out there pushing innovation with unusual designs. And if you have made it this far and still decided that the device is for you despite its flaws, I think you'll really love what you are getting. Thumbs and subs support my channel, and as always, thanks for watching.